Good morning and welcome to Sunday Coffee. Joining me today for a cup of Joe is TK Eppley. Today we're going to talk a little bit about a New York Times article about whether or not these secure messaging apps are where everyone is going in order to spread disinformation. And is it even a proper tool to do so? I'm your host, Dr. Dan Ford, and this is EchelonOrchid. Good morning, TK.
Good morning, sir. I had no idea we were talking about that. I thought we were just going to continue our discussion of how rakishly handsome you were.
I mean, that's always a given, but it gets kind of boring after a while. I mean, I'm constantly I'm like, yeah.
Well, we get new followers. We got to get them engaged.
Yeah, I think almost like we talk about almost every week. I really wish the news would slow down so we could talk about something that might help us as a society get a little bit further along. But then these things just keep coming back up, like with this New York Times article, and we talked about it well before people actually started doing this, which was, hey, you're just going to send these people off to like Signal and Telegram, and now you're not going to know what they're saying. And, and I don't know if you had a chance to read the article, and I sent it to you earlier, but I think Brian Chen and Kevin Roos, I think they completely get it wrong. Mainly because, and this is where I really have a very strong feeling about this, and I'm sure you do as well, because you've talked about it. They say it's a good thing to remove these people because the worst thing we want is this, have these fascists online, spreading all of this misinformation. And I want to go, that is what a fascist does, right? You control the narrative, and you're putting this under the guise of, well, we're doing this to save people from falling into that trap. The best way to prevent people from falling into traps of misinformation, it's called facts,
Right.
Like real facts. Taking people offline and into that, you're so, I talked last Wednesday. I don't know if you caught it or not, but I played this game at my company. Basically, I told everyone that we're going to play this game, and the goal of the game was to create the biggest group possible that didn't contain a witch or a sorcerer, and that I would send you a separate email letting you know if you were normal or a witch and sorcerer. Well, everyone got the email that they were normal. And of course, what happened? Groups got formed. Some people were solo. And I said, the idea that the reason for this, why this is bad, is that as leaders, our job is to break down silos. Our job is to break down these cliques and these echo chambers in order to make sure diversity and inclusion can happen.
Right. That everyone's heard.
Right.
Everyone's heard for two reasons. One, everyone's heard because it's incumbent upon us to, as civil human beings, to listen to others' opinions, even if we disagree with them, or even if we find them to be abhorrent, right? If for no other reason, they were like, hey, dude, you got to check yourself, and we're going to talk about it, right? And learn how to have a conversation with people you disagree with, because that's how great advancements in technology, science, religion, the arts happen, is we disagree on things, and then somebody says, well, what about this? And now there's the next great advancement, right?
Yep.
And that's a great game. I love that. It's it's like I tell you a secret, and 10 people later it comes back, and it's not even the same thing, right? Because everybody wants to put their own biases on what the truth is, and we hear it all the time. It's like, well, I'm going to tell my truth. Well, no. When you say my truth, you mean your opinion, right? Because then we have facts and then we have opinion, and then you have factual opinions, right? That yeah, you're generally right, but I disagree with your premise.
And then we have statistics.
Yeah. Well, it's like I said before. You ask a mathematician what 2 + 2 is, it's going to say 4. You ask an MBA, a CFO, he's like, what quarter does it have to be for? And then you ask an arts and sciences major or an arts major, and they're going to be like, do I really have to get the letter 4 onto the paper? Right? Because there's a thing, and there's a place in life for all of that. Right? Because with art in particular, you push boundaries, right? And in pushing boundaries, you do it not just in the sensory, but in intrinsic boundaries, and those things are good. When you start saying we're going to want to push those people off so we can't hear them, it's the exact opposite of who we are as who we purport to be as a free society.
Right. And I think one of the things, and I think we've both said something along these lines over the years, when we are talking about diversity, inclusion, and why people's voices need to be heard, it's that, your counsel is always welcomed, but it's not required. And, as leaders, we want to make sure we hear everyone. And the reason for that is because we're trying to fill in our blind spots. We know we have them. They're blind spots for a reason, because we can't see them. But we can recognize it when someone says something and we go, aha.
Right. I think, for me, it's like when you look around the landscape and somebody is screaming at the top of their lungs, which is pretty much what goes on right now, that we got to get rid of these people. They can't have a voice. They can't have a voice. They can't have a voice. What are you so scared about? Right. I want to hear it. And now, if I wasn't paying attention to what was going on with a certain segment of the population, by telling me that they deserve to be put in a dustbin and we don't look at them, I want to go look at them, because I want to know what scares you so much about them. And I don't want to listen to what you're saying. I want to go figure it out. And I think that's the problem that we have right now, is most people, they want to be told how to think so they can move on with their day. Excuse me. I got to get back to doing whatever I do, right? Whether it's work, family, whatever. But how do I have the least amount of interaction with my own rational thoughts, right? And that's when that gets dangerous, is telling people what to think.
It is. And so, so this guy, Kevin, and I don't know if you read the article, but I'll read this and I'd like to get your take on it. So the other guy asks him if he's concerned that they're moving to things like Signal and Telegram, mainly because, hey, law enforcement can't get, which is, largely a true statement. But he's like, I'm not concerned. It's obviously not great for public safety that neo-Nazis, far-right militias, and other dangerous groups are finding their ways to communicate and organize, and that those ways involve end-to-end encryption. We've seen this happen for years, going all the way back to ISIS. But essentially, there's a real benefit to getting these extremists off mainstream platforms, when they can find new sympathizers and take advantage of the broadcast mechanics of those platforms to spread their messages to millions of potential extremists. I think it's a good thing.
Okay, misses the point. In that when I hear that, right, I want you to point to the people you're talking about, and I want to hear what they have to say, because your definition, how do you define extremist? Do you truly define it as somebody that has extreme views that are dangerous to the fabric of America? Or are these people that just disagree with your point of view?
Yeah, so what would be dangerous to the fabric of America?
I mean, if you're advocating for the overthrow of the government, right? If you're advocating that we have a one-party system, right, and a lot of people will argue that we currently do that, right? And I'm not like, you have people that, and I say, look, the Republicans and Democrats are obverse sides of the same coin, shouting at their base.
Agreed.
Right. And so how much we don't legislate anymore. We've talked about this before. We don't legislate anymore. Right. We have people from both parties stand up in empty chambers of House and Senate and opine just to get it on the record. And then a brokered 5,000-page bill that neither party's constituents or members read is all of a sudden passed, and they already know who's going to vote for it ahead of time, and they know they can do it, right? Or they don't do it. There's no free thinking. There's no advocating for compromise, right? And we wonder why we're in the position where it's like I said, that's why we can't have nice things, right? Well, because we don't think like a democracy anymore. And yes, we are a representative republic and not a democracy, but those representatives are there to legislate on our behalf. And that's where people get frustrated on both sides of the thing, is they don't feel there's that ebb and flow of debate, right? Because it has to happen in public on the news for 10 seconds and then we go back. And
Yeah.
the amount of money that's transacting and moving and where it's going, the biggest fear that and it's funny because this bill gets shot down like a low-flying duck. The idea of it gets shot down like a low-flying duck is that every line item in every spending bill, you have to have attached to it who sponsored that line item, not the bill, but who sponsored the line item. Right. And there was another one I saw, and this wasn't from another card. This was the truth in advertising for bills. They'll come up with all these acronyms to make it sound like, oh, we're doing this. And it's like, no, let's just say what this bill is.
Patriot Act.
Right. The CARES Act. Right. All these things. It's like, great. But now we've got a marketing department in Congress. Right.
That's exactly what we need. Isn't that the true definition of government propaganda?
Well, yeah, yes, you can go that far, but it's like, to me, it just cracks me up because, and it's like, it's not like, this isn't unique to one party, right? This is the institution. The institution is that, right? And, like I said, I always think that, Congress people, both in the House and Senate, instead of wearing suits and shirts and ties, they should have to wear fire suits like NASCAR racers, and everybody that's giving them money, depending on the logo, depending on how big it is where it's bought and paid for.
Yeah. So there's this thing that we have forgotten about what negotiation really means, right? Or an argument really means, which is you're supposed to start with what do we have in common? Because once we agree with what we all agree with, then okay, perfect. Like, I think most rational people would agree that in Maslow's hierarchy, we want people to not have to worry about that they're going to get food and housing, things like that. We want those basic needs to be taken care of. Now, how do we get that is where the debate should, because I think we all agree this, but it's the how. We have forgotten that we need to figure out what we have in common first. It's now I will not give anything away. If it's not that important to you, then why are you arguing over it?
Right.
And they make everything, it's now I have to win, I have to win, I have to win. And you're winning at the expense of the nation. And that's not what's good for the nation. It's not good when the vice president has to cast a vote because there's a tie. That is very, very bad. Now,
it's intellectually lazy of Congress.
Right. Absolutely. And now, if VP Harris had said, "I'm going to vote present," I would have been like, you know what? I was absolutely wrong about you, because you have said because now you all actually your administration said, we're not doing this by executive orders, which they're already doing, but we want to bring people together. If she does that one time, I will be the biggest fan of her, because then she's finally doing what no one has really done before her.
Right.
You shouldn't, if it's 50-50, then okay, why? Well, because it's being done by party lines, and that means you are intentionally alienating 50% of the United States. How is that good?
Right. Well, and I get to the point now where when I want to be at my most, jaded about what goes on, whoever's winning that day, they don't care about the other 50%.
No.
Right.
No.
It has nothing to do with that. Right. And that's the bigger issue. Right. Whether you talk about big pharma, mass communications, or anything like that, I go back to, I think it's 2006, 2000, somewhere in that area, in that time frame, when the big Telecommunications Act was passed. There's this massive piece of legislation that was sponsored by Arlen Specter, who at the time was the senior senator from Pennsylvania. Do you think a 70-plus-year-old man battling cancer wrote that law, or do you think Comcast in his district wrote that law?
Oh, gee, I don't know.
And we can argue that of all of the providers, Comcast is the worst, period, company, period, full stop, period, with a demonic CEO and Dolan, right? That's when you want people to really get upset, is in anything, whether it's, like I said, the things that matter, like healthcare, big pharma, and everything. When we've talked about this before, when you talk about ACA, is when the president at the time stood up and said, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Nothing's going to change, and like that. Remember, my thing was it has to, right? Things have to change, because if you take an existing system that you've brokered to deal with the insurance companies, because the insurance companies weren't going to pack up and say, all right, federal government, you just take over. We're tired of making money and we're out. So
should insurance companies be for profit?
Here's the thing. I go back and forth on this, and some of it is the legislative process.
TK is not sponsored by an insurance company.
No, exactly. Definitely not. The concept that, and this is one of the things that was said when you talk, 45 million Americans don't have healthcare, so we've got to, and then fill in the blank. My thing was co-op 14% of the GDP for 45 million Americans.
I don't even know if it would be that high.
No, but that was the number that was thrown around, right? And so healthcare is that, at the time, was roughly that piece of our GDP, and the cost of drugs in the U.S., right? Even the military at one point was not allowed to basically bargain with the drug companies. They just had to buy it at whatever price they were selling it at, right? And so again, you look at, and one of the biggest recipients of funds from the pharma industry is Cory Booker, senator from New Jersey, and it's like there's not a pharma bill that he votes on that even remotely is considerate towards disadvantaged people. And how do we get, there's technology gap and the healthcare gap are the two single biggest problems in getting people in impoverished situations out of them, right now. And you look at, we're losing a whole generation of kids because of COVID and the idiocy of not putting them back in school. And don't at me, because I don't really care what your opinion is on it. We need to get kids back in school, and if you don't agree with this, we can't be friends, right? I mean, there's no medical evidence that supports that kids are in general a high risk group unless you're raising a little obesity kid, right? And we'll have a whole nother, and even then it's very low, right?
Right.
But you're killing your kid another way, right? But this concept that if you miss out on correct, wellness checks and all those visits when you're a child, then you're setting yourself up for systemic problems when you get older, right?
Absolutely.
And absolutely. If you look in it's no big deal in my neighborhood where my child goes to school, other than the social impact of not having kids interact with each other. And again, what are we doing? We're separating people and putting them in little boxes for the past 2 years that have very formative minds. And then we're telling them exactly, here's what you have to think. And we're saying, no, it's not doing any damage. Well, it totally is, because student suicides are up, right? And not a little bit, where it's so alarming that superintendents of schools are begging states and their unions to get kids back in class, because that is becoming a thing, right? But the technology gap is huge. If you go into Section 8 homes, or that end of the poverty spectrum, the only place that most of those children have internet is on somebody's phone. And so what are those kids? They're not going to school, right? If the only instrument that they have to have access to the rest of the world via the internet is on an adult's phone, then that adult is probably leaving the house and going to work trying to make ends meet. All of those things that are happening. That's a discussion that, as a nation, we don't want to have.
Right. So
it's not that some people don't want to have it. I'm saying we've proven by our actions as a nation, we're unwilling to have a debate about it, because it's, hey, you either agree with, we just start giving people everything, or on the other end, hey, let's figure out how to get these people educated and employed so that every American has buy into the franchise of what it can be to be an American, right? That's my problem, is when people are despondent and they have no hope, hopelessness breeds the worst of humanity.
Absolutely, it does.
Right. And that's in large measure where we're at. And paying somebody $15 an hour isn't going to fix that.
No, it doesn't. So going
Right.
back to the health insurance question, should health insurance companies be for profit?
You would almost have to say no now because of the way that everything's been implemented. But this goes back, this is a bigger thing, right? So in 1954, the Congress essentially passed wage and price controls, right? And so all of these companies, big companies, the General Electrics, the Westinghouse of the day, all the, those big companies of the mid 20th century that were in the business of making us the industrial power that we had become as a result of World War II. They started to provide lavish healthcare plans for their employees. And it was a way to say, yep, we can't pay you anymore, but here we're paying you more, right? And so the federal government largely got a pass for 50 years on dealing with it. And again, the amount of people that were in the cracks there was cost-effective insurance to deal with it and everything like that. And then things started to explode in the 80s into the 90s, and then things got worse and worse. We're having a renaissance of that type of healthcare again. Smaller tech companies, and I won't say their names because I don't know if they're happy with me getting out there, but some tech companies that are doing some great work in some really innovative areas to solve big problems. They're providing platinum healthcare plans to their employees. And by that platinum, I mean zero cost out of pocket for the highest quality health insurance for the employee and their family, right? What are they doing, right? Well, I mean, literally, what are they doing? They're removing probably the single largest impediment to a productive workday for an employee, mom or dad or brother thing that they have. Like, what am I thinking? Like, hey, if I've got a sick child, and that we don't have, we're spending an exorbitant amount on healthcare, I'm not going to be as focused on doing my job.
Absolutely true.
Right.
And this is why I was going that, I do believe health insurance companies should be not for profit. And I probably would have been a different thing until actually having worked for a credit union, in that it's not that you're not making money, because you are, it's just that you're taking it away for something that should be considered infrastructure. Like, if people's healthcare aren't provided for and cared for, then we can't get better as a society. So they still need to make money, because they need to make money to reinvest back into that company.
Right.
And that's what I like about that. Which but I'm like this also. Like, to me, I think the internet at this point in time should be considered a public utility, and therefore the Comcasts of the world should no longer be able to make a profit of that nature, because it's, to me, a basic need now.
Right. Well, if you look at that sort of like Comcast and everybody, like they're trying to over the past 15 years, because they could see what was coming with 5G and beyond, where you're trying to align yourself with telecommunications providers, because the days of having somebody come out to your house and make sure you got wired internet, whether it's Fios or whatever, are coming to an end.
Yeah, I won't need it.
And Elon Musk is turning that on its head. I mean, that crazy bastard's launching crap into space daily. I mean, he's putting dumpsters out. You tell him he can't put something into space, and he's going to get into space. I mean, look at the telecommunications network he's setting up by launching all the satellites right now.
Yeah, or he's blowing up the ships, one or the other. So let's, getting this back into, we apply the same standard. Okay, so several things have happened in the news about that haven't been applying the same standard. So first, you've got the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, refusing to go through metal detectors, whereas the rules of the House were everyone must do it. And then so many people weren't doing it, they decided, hey, if you don't do it, you're going to get fined $5,000 for the first offense, $10,000 thereafter. How come Nancy Pelosi hasn't been fined yet?
It goes back to the core premise that we've been indoctrinated as a nation into calling our elected representatives leaders.
Ugh.
If you're a leader, you lead by example, right? And I don't make a rule that I'm not willing to follow. Right? That's what leaders do, right? By the way, anybody out there that if you're got a question, that's what leaders do, right? They make rules that they're going to follow as an example to everybody else. If you're going to have that structure of leadership, it's not in the DNA of most elected officials, right? They're there to be our leaders, right? And it's a faulty premise to say that to start with, right? Where if you want to fix that, right? Well, first off, I'm of the mind that to my understanding, right, is the metal detectors are where? They're not at the entrance to the Capitol, right? They're at the front doors to the chambers, right? Well, the only people that are allowed in the chambers anyway are members and former members and staffers, right? But even there's limited access to staffers depending on what's going on, right? So the real problem isn't there. It's at the next perimeter out, right? That's the larger issue. And I don't know what level of, well, let's put it this way. If I go to the Air and Space Museum down the street from the Capitol, I got to go through a magnetometer to get in and a bag check, right? I would hope that the Capitol, even if you're a tourist, there's that level, at a minimum, that level of security and that everybody abides by it, right? But putting it's virtue signaling, it's putting on a show, it's theater, right? It's not actual, we're not actually solving a problem, right? The bigger issue is this thought that, we're up, like we have the camera, we make the rules, right? And that's having access to the public discourse in a way that you or I don't in the masses, right? You get on any of the news programs, pick a channel, pick a talking head, and you're allowed to get on and talk for 3 minutes, or whatever that time span is. What net effect can you have, positively or negatively, on the discourse of America, right? And I think that when you start talking about to drill back further, and you go, hey, we want these folks to go out to Signal, WhatsApp, all that other stuff, and get them off Twitter, get them off all these platforms where they're espousing their views. What you're saying is, hey, we're removing your 3 minutes in the sun, because if you put that what somebody says on a national news program for 2 or 3 minutes, you can change history, right? Why do you think when somebody comes out with something new, and there's things like even a movie, like, or a new movies get released, what happens? The actors end up going on all the talk shows. Why? Because it's one thing for somebody to read about it on the internet. It's another thing to see it and be able to put it up on YouTube and all the other things, because it's a force multiplier to get information out, right? And so aside from the fact that not wanting to hear from a certain segment of population because you disagree or think what they say is abhorrent really makes me crazy, because it's anathema to everything as Americans that we espouse. But I dovetail this into healthcare, because healthcare now is a huge technology business, right? It has to be, right? And with remote patient monitoring and things like that, I mean, people are having devices, whether it's an Apple Watch that's collecting the information that on your heart rate, and you can take it to your cardiologist and everything like that. The biggest problem right now that providers are having is there's this whole host of information. There's easy access to information and disinformation on any malady on the planet. And for the most part, your average patient is a hypochondriac, and they're scared, right? When something happens, or they, the old Jeff Foxworthy joke, his wife used to watch all these stuff, and she, whatever she saw on TV, she's like, I have all those symptoms. He's like, honey, you don't have testicular cancer. You don't even have testiculars, right? And it's that concept that, WebMD is great, but it should be background information. It shouldn't replace a provider, right? The biggest sticking point when as a nation, we started having this discussion that was said was uninsured people, which at the time was 45 million Americans. And that was the stated number, right? I'm going with what was stated. And pre-existing conditions, right? If you're going to say that, healthcare, like any other regulated industry, is regulated. If it's regulated, pass legislation that says you can't. There's two things. One is you can't turn somebody down for a pre-existing condition. And two, you have portability of insurance, right? The portability piece, making a portability act for insurance is the single biggest advantage to help guarantee upward employment mobility. Because how many people are at a job that they're like, oh man, I got a menial job, or I got a job where I'm less than fully engaged, fully employed, right? And for a lot of people, that's important, right? I need to think, I want to grow, and I want to, those things. But I have such great insurance, and I've got a family member that's unhealthy, and I just can't leave. We're in a position where we're locked into health insurance. Like, that's insanity, right? Legislate the industry into a regulation that makes sense. Don't say we're going to take an industry who will never be brought into line to be a national health, like one single payer national health system. And for those of you who've never lived under a national health system, go talk to somebody that has and see how they enjoy it. Most of them come here for operations. And then put a government layer on there, which is what effectively ACA did. We kept the same system. We exempted most of the Fortune 50, most of the Fortune 500. So we brokered a bad deal that said, hey, this insurance new thing's not going to be good. And we know it's not going to be good because all of the big companies that have sway were allowed to be exempt from it. And then we're going to put a layer of management on top of it at the government level. And then we're going to tell everybody it's going to be cheaper. It doesn't make sense. Like, it just, like, you can't keep adding layers of bureaucracy to things and have them be cheaper. It doesn't work that way. It's fantasy, right? That's what most people that want a single payer healthcare want, whatever, but they want something and they're trying to tell people it's going to be less expensive. It's not going to be less. It can't. It's impossible for it to be less expensive, right? And unless you want to broker a deal that makes the U.S. the de facto health provider, right? Which is what a lot of progressives really want. They want it to be the national health provider. No. We have the best healthcare in the world, right? As for the size of our society, we have the best healthcare in the world. Let's figure out how to expand access to that. And you can say, well, hey, you're not going to be for profit, or you're going to, we're things, but they're already a regulated industry. The issue is they're regulated at the state level, not the federal level. Now, they're manhandled at the federal level with Medicare and Medicaid, right? And billing codes and access to all of those things, right? So in traditional federal style, we want to usurp the 10th Amendment. We do it with dollars. We do it with unfunded mandates. We do it with, hey, you're going to lose your highway dollars unless you make the drinking age 21, right? And so we get back to this all the time, and I want to beat this drum every week if we can. Let's get back to teaching kids government in school. Social studies, fine, but let's teach them how the Constitution works, what the constructs of our government are, and why what we're seeing right now is like in insurance, in health insurance, it's federal overreach is wrecking the system, right? Because if you're going to use the federal government as a tool to get everybody health care, do it to legislate nationally a regulated industry that you can pick up your insurance, you can go somewhere else. And that insurance has to be comparable no matter where they go, right? And you cannot restrict for mid treatment. So somebody's getting cancer treatment, and all of a sudden I can go from making 50 grand a year to 100 grand a year because I've finished a degree, I have the opportunity. But no, I've got to stay in this 50 grand a year job because I've got a family member in a mid-cancer treatment. And if we leave, there's doubt as to whether we can continue, right? That's a choice no human, let alone, no human should have to make about a family member. What's that?
No rational person would make that decision.
Right. They're going to stay. They're like, hey, I'm going to suck it up, right? That's called being an adult. It's called being mature. I'm going to stay in a bad situation for me personally to guarantee that somebody else has the opportunity to keep living. Right. I mean, that's really what you're talking about when you're talking about cancer treatments, right? How do we, like right now in oncology, let's talk cancer. How do we, most of it's still experimental, right? We don't have a handle on it, right? If we did, it wouldn't be considered a miracle every time somebody beats cancer, right? But in the oncology world, the best I understand it is the pharma companies and the providers of treatments, they give bonuses to try things that are considered to be experimental or at least beta, right? And here's the thing. I'm not against that at all. But let's be upfront about how those treatments are getting into the provider's hands, right? But I think insurance portability and the guarantee of not discriminating against pre-existing conditions, and this is where this is the pipe dream of when I sit cross-legged and think about the perfect government according to TK, is when we talk about subsistence, right? Commonly referred to as welfare. If you want the nation to grow and you want to provide a path to employment, then the fundamental all or nothing system that we currently have for subsistence has to go. What do I mean by that? Let's say right now I'm unemployed and I'm allotted, let's keep the numbers simple. I'm allotted a $500 a week benefit, right? If that thing even exists. They're like, look, I go down to the unemployment office and I'm like, boom, you're allowed $500 a week. Well, along with that comes Medicaid, comes a whole host of, comes food stamps, and all the other things that come along with that. In order not to remove hope from society, people have to feel functional. And in order to do it, sitting on your behind and just collecting a $500 check, whether people realize this is not, is extremely psychologically damaging over time. Everybody needs a hand every now and again, right? People fall down, we go pick them up. And as humanely as we can, we have to continue to do that. But if I go out and I find a job and that job pays me $200 a week, instead of in the TK plan saying, all right, now you're making 200, so we're going to cut your benefit back. We're only going to give you 300, so you still have the 500 net, but now you have a job. What's the easiest way to find a better job? Have a job. You still keep your health insurance. You still keep all these things until you move in, as you gain benefit from employment, whatever that benefit is, we start lowering the benefit that the federal government's providing, right? Helping hand, not a lifestyle. And in doing so, you also reduce the amount we're spending, and we're not creating a third or fourth generation of professional subsistence livers, right? Because people don't take care of stuff that they don't own. Take your kids. How many bicycles do you buy a kid before they buy their first bike? And all of a sudden that first bike that they buy is the one that gets taken care of. It's not in the ditch on the side of the road or anything like that while they're out playing. It's on the kickstand. It's all a thing. Why? Because they have ownership of that. And that's healthy, right? Contributing society and helping other people, whether, like I said, whether walking out of an ambulance and picking somebody up off the ground that's gotten hurt, or by being a high functioning member of society that doesn't day to day need anything, the basics, that Maslow's hierarchy, they don't need the basics from society. That's a feeling that empowers people, right? And if you want to hold down a society, then get as many people on subsistence as you can and make them reliant, because you're psychologically damaging them more than you're doing anything else. Right? And then when you look in the major cities in America where you have pockets of extreme poverty, what accompanies that is violence, right? And the violence isn't caused by the fact that they're on subsistence. The violence is caused by the fact that they have no hope.
Desperate people do desperate things.
If you're hopeless, shooting somebody doesn't seem like a bad idea.
No, because at least then you're going to now have housing, you're going to have food, you're going to have health care. Because right. I mean, they may not be thinking that way, but that is the result.
Right. But that's when you want to talk about fixing healthcare. To me, it's portability and it's pre-existing conditions. And that's now, and then you at the bottom end, we can talk about the quality of Medicaid and what people at the lower end, but you start saying that people at the lower end they're not doing wellness checks. They're not doing all the things of children that employed adults with health insurance, good or bad, do to get their children and themselves to stay healthy.
Right.
Absolutely. That, and I think the other part of the health debate is fixing how we talk about agriculture in the U.S. and what like food labeling and things like that. If you look at, for example, in some European countries, you can't sell the ketchup we sell here. And what's the number one thing kids want to put on food? They want to put ketchup on food.
Well, get rid of the high fructose corn syrup, which isn't a lot of it. I mean, that could be a good start.
Right. And then 3 other things that you can't pronounce.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, speaking of things you can't pronounce, someone should take a look at the ingredients in your body wash. My gosh. And I'm like, what the hell is this? So I'm gonna switch slightly because I do.
Surprised your skin doesn't fly off.
Yeah. So what do you think, or the main reason is for California Democrats' love affair with spies? So you got Eric Swalwell, you've got Dianne Feinstein, and then you've got Boxer. I mean, what is their love affair with spies? Did I stump you?
No, I think, and I'm not going to limit it to them, right? And I'm not going to limit it to spies. Politicians at whatever level love access and they love control these days, right? And that's simple. It's the mayor here, it's the governor of pick a state, right? And they love access and they love and people will ignore really bad behavior to get what they want, right? And a considerable portion of the population, I mean, we've done this to ourselves, right? So a considerable portion of the population does not consider the CCP, because it's not the average Chinese person, right? They don't consider the CCP to be the global menace that other people think and the biggest threat that we have. And if you're ignorant to that fact, right? And it even goes back to Hillary with the email scandal and like that. I mean, she had a Pakistani national that was supposedly the administrator for that thing, right? And at the time, there's a certain frenemy relationship with Pakistan, right? That the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And that how in all of these cases, if people know that exists, right? And like if we know it, it's in the news now, then everybody else leading up to it knew it. So why was there no other mechanism in elective government that says, hey, by the way, what have we done? That person's on your staff. What are we doing to vet that Chinese national? Right. But again, it's not just them. Oh God, no. What does everybody, in elected office want? They want money, right? What do all these research institutions need? They want money, right? And how many Chinese nationals have, and other countries' nationals, and hey, for all the people on the right that want to say this is a left problem, Israel was, and probably still is, one of the biggest industrial espionage purveyors of the U.S., right?
And the NCIX stopped producing that report to the public on an annual basis several years ago. So it's hard to know, but last they were number 2.
Right. In France was high on the list of us. And here's the thing. Like, does it, people like, maybe I'm the only one on the earth that notices this, that the Chinese 5th generation fighter looks tremendously like the YF-22. The Russian space shuttle, before they shut that program down at the end when the wall fell down, looks surprisingly like the space shuttle's little brother. What do you think? They just saw it on CNN and were able to draw it up and get it done?
No. So I'll tell you, this is an interesting story, at least for me. It was a very, eye-opening. So I did a lot of work for the Department of Energy, at one time, in trying to build their cybersecurity architecture that would go across the department. Was extremely challenging, mainly because, and my memory may not be serving me entirely correctly, but basically there's like 4 main components of the Department of Energy. You've got the NNSA, which is the National Nuclear Security Agency. They're the people responsible for kind of protecting our, nuclear power plants here in the United States. They get the most of their funding from the Department of Defense. Then you've got science, or let's first go energy, which gets their stuff from Congress typically. Then you've got the organizational department, which is kind of like where the CIO sits. And then you've got science. Okay. Now, science, this is where it gets really interesting. I'm like, because they look at themselves as an academic institute and they allow pretty much every university in the world access to their data. Free restriction. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, should they? This doesn't make sense. This was their response. Science is universal. It only becomes classified based on how the United States government chooses to apply that science. But science should be freely given to everyone.
Right.
Huh. What? No. Like, okay,
No, and I'd be like, great, that's fine. Then why are we as the nation overpaying for every drug that comes out and the rest of the world goes right to generics? Right? Or the rest of the world provides them, or they're provided to other countries at a much lower cost. Do I understand the need to do research, and it's usually expensive, but that's science and it should be freely made available to everybody.
Yeah. Like, I'm going, wait a minute. Like, okay, I can certainly see, like, you know this. Some others likely don't, but I mean, information has to be compartmentalized for a reason, right? Especially in the government. Perhaps I'm willing to share with the other members of the Five Eyes a little bit more science than I would with someone that is largely never a military ally. You know, China as an example. They're an economic ally in some cases, depending on which side of the aisle you want to look from. But, you know, they certainly have helped our economy grow because of business. I mean, they're manufacturing and it helped them. But they're not a military ally. Therefore, I might not want to share some research that might enable their military at some point in time to surpass ours. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy.
Everybody has friends, right? And some friends you trust more than others, right? And I think hey, we want to open everything up. No, we don't, right? And you have great companies right now doing great work to try to secure the power grid, for example, right? With OT security. There's a lot of great companies that are out there doing it. And they're doing it at various levels, right? You know, a couple companies there, and people are taking different segments of the market. And I think it's one of the fastest growing, verticals in technology is the OT. And why do you, and as a national asset, right? We have to treat power as a national asset, just like we have to treat water as a national asset. So what we do to secure that, right? I'm a big open source guy. It's like, keep the secret, but let's get out there and let's get the code base out there to make everything move faster and make sure, because what's the conundrum in the power industry? Hey, we were great when everything was offline, but then we had trouble with cascading and all the other older analog problems that you had when there was a power outage. So what do? We connected everything to, via the internet, because it's kind of what we do. And now all of a sudden there creates a great security risk. Let me ask you this question. Do you believe that the mutually assured destruction, and for those people that don't understand the concept, mutually assured destruction was an idea that was brokered in the 50s, largely by Curtis LeMay, who at one point had his fair share of nuclear weapons at his disposal, being the head of Bomber Command and Strategic Command. Mutually assured destruction says we all have enough missiles pointed at each other to kill ourselves 100 times over. And yes, if that doesn't sound silly to you, we're not going to be friends, right? But do you believe that the mutually assured destruction of the 21st century is that, hey, I've tapped into your computer networks, you've tapped into mine, and we can both shut all these countries completely off in a time of war. So let's keep our fingers off that button and let everybody lead functional lives with water and power and all the nice Lululemon stores and all the top level of Maslow's hierarchy things that we've come to know and love, and make that the mutually assured destruction of the 21st century. Do you believe that exists?
No, I don't, and here's why. Unfortunately, it is from a state perspective. Yes, unfortunately, there are too many rogue actors that exist in the world that would be able to do the same thing, and then there's no destruction for them, right? So, from a state perspective, I could see this, but it's those rogue actors.
Right.
It's too today to have these rogue actors, because the science in this case isn't limited. I can get a group of people that don't like something and then attack that infrastructure and eventually get in. And I don't think in many cases that they're state sponsored. I think they may be in that state, but it's not being done by a Russia or a China or North Korea.
Right.
And I think that's the problem.
Okay. That's valid. Like I said, but you start moving away from it that, at some point, like,
but it's a very good question. I mean, mutually assured destruction keeps a lot of us, from a state perspective, from doing something stupid because, okay, we're all going to die here. Like, are you prepared for, like, it's not just you, it's
Right.
all the whole world. Right.
Well, I mean, you look back from, the late 40s up through the 90s, I mean, and let's not talk about the human rights violations in Eastern Europe and, the Soviet satellites countries, but from a perspective of the kind of keeping the world in order, right? That, we had all of our allies, and through economic and other means, we coerced people into saying, "Hey, keep yourself together." And then the Soviets, to a certain extent, did the same way. And we would co-opt our anger and our differences in small regional wars, whether it was Korea, Vietnam,
proxy wars.
Yeah, and we would just, we would like, let's go over there for a little bit, or let them fight it out and do things, and you'll have your equipment. I mean, it's even now, like Turkey being the only Arab NATO country, they were part of the Joint Strike Fighter program, and I don't know all the things behind it, but all of a sudden, whatever missile defense system, we would normally provide to other NATO allies, there was a hiccup in what was in. So they immediately, Putin moved in, and here, we'll give you I think it's SS-400s, like whatever that equivalent is of the Russian aircraft hardware. Well, that then put the J-35 program in peril in Turkey, because even though all of these things, for folks that don't know, all of these stealth airplanes, if you pound rads against that thing in very specific flight patterns for a long enough time, the computers are going to start to figure out what that thing looks like, even though it's infinitesimally small, right? And stealth technology, you don't generally fly directly at it. You fly in the seams and use everything to your advantage for the most amount of time you can.
Right. So you said everyone has a friend earlier. So I'm curious, who do you think Chairman Mao's friend was?
Actually, that's a silly question. It's a silly question, but it brings up, this concept of, when we start rewriting history, right? And we start excluding things that make us uncomfortable from American history, right? Which is, in cases what we're doing. That when Chinese students come over here and they take history classes, much like the Japanese, like the number one tourist attraction to Japanese people is going to Pearl Harbor.
Oh yeah,
because they've never talked about it in school, right? When I was in active duty, we had a German exchange guy. We were down in Puerto Rico one Saturday afternoon. We're watching TV. It was on the History Channel. It was something about World War II, and he's like, why is it always the war? Why is it always the war? And one of the guys looks at this guy and goes, "Hey, you start winning world wars, you can put on TV whatever you want." What a prophetic statement, right? Who gets to do the talking, right? In China right now, you talk to a lot of these Chinese students when they show up, or Chinese Americans, and they start reading about having free access to the internet and reading about China in a way that they are not allowed to in China. Mao goes from being a hero to being the killer of millions of Chinese citizens that he was. And it's the same with Stalin and everybody else, right? But that to me is like, even Hitler loved dogs, right? And that's, there's a reason you don't see people naming their kids Adolf.
No, and it's funny when we talk about Stalin, and people may forget, Stalin was probably Lenin's only friend, which is why Stalin ended up the way he was when you talk about the friend aspect. Right. But the Marxo-Lenin communists killed 6 million Ukrainians.
Yeah. And it doesn't count the Russians they killed.
Right. And so, when you and there, I mean, this is how bad communism is, even for those that are popular. What was the Russian ice skating couple, Baryshnikov and someone else, anyway, when they were over here doing an exhibition, and they're like at the top of celebrity status, and they're like, we don't want to go back, we'll stay here, please
Right.
please allow us to be have exile status, right? That's how bad it is, that you are that popular in your country and you're going, no, it's horrible.
People don't, and this is like I say this all the time, people don't defect from the US. You're free to leave.
Yeah.
Right? You are free to leave. Right? And that's, and I say this all the time, America sucks until you go somewhere else. Right? And that's, people want perfect, right? I want better. Right? And we can do better as Americans. We can do better as humans. Right? And I said, that's, people pick an idea of perfect that most benefits them, rather than saying, what are we doing to make America better? Right? Because, it's just to a point now where I don't care about your politics. I really don't. Tell me what you're doing to make other people better, and politically how we're going to action that. Right? Because the rest of it is just you running your yap 24/7 to get on the news to espouse a point of view that I probably don't agree with. Right? And that's on both sides of the coin these days. Right? Because we have to have a coin, because if you have three parties and, somebody has to, it's one of the things that, getting a viable third party, for example, in this country would fix is you then would have to have a coalition. Right? If all of a sudden one party couldn't win just because the third party system allows for somebody to, wave their hand in the air with no actionable end to it. If there was a viable third party, then people would have to form a coalition. And what do you have to do to form a coalition? You have to compromise. Right? And we're at a point now where, hey, I want to control every house of government so I get my way.
Right? Yeah, I think we wouldn't need very many, right? We're talking in the Senate, 10 that are of a third party.
Yeah.
That's all it requires. The House, probably 50.
Yeah, plus or minus. Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I mean, you
have real negotiations going on for the betterment of the country.
Because as a representative republic with two parties, what we've done is we start to slow down the democracy acts piece of it, right? And that's when people are that were absent the day they talk government are like, oh, we want to get rid of the electoral college, right? It's like, right? You guys don't get it, right?
No.
What we do is hard in America as a government. There's a reason that when all of these totalitarian regimes walk away from small countries, that they go to a parliamentary system. Right. And then it literally is a banana republic for 5 to 10 years while they try to figure out having
every system is not easy either. It's just easier than what we have.
Right.
It's and I always just pose this question, like, all right, it's really interesting to me the amount of people, and they can call it socialism all they want. It's that every single communist regime said they were socialist, right? It's so, to be fair, they're communists. Communism has not worked anywhere in the entire world. It has not worked.
Right.
So it just so happens to be another generation comes up and goes, well, they didn't do it right. Well, it's been tried many, many, many times, and it hasn't worked. Capitalist societies have. Now, is capitalism the best solution? Probably not, but it's better than what the alternatives are. So give me something better,
right?
Then all right, I'm willing to consider. And I think there are some pieces, which is why I tend to float towards that, anarcho-capitalist type mentality, where I don't like big business, because I've seen what they're doing during COVID, and that started to turn me off to any big business and chain like stores that are out there, because they are able to drive down prices to a point to where I think it perpetuates a cycle of dependency and wages and all stuff like Walmart. Like Walmart can really play a lot of games if they I think.
Well, here's the thing, and just go with COVID. So you're telling me I can't get that it's safe to go into Walmart and shop, but it's not safe to go in a mom and pop store. Right. That's that right there. You lost me. Right. I can't, sorry. You got you got to reel me back in on that one, because I don't understand. Right. I mean, I do understand, but I don't understand. Right. That kind of thing. And I think when we start talking about, everybody wants to, in the public domain, right? When people want to get up and shout with their pitchforks, it's, hey, we're either capitalism is bad and it just breeds for the top 1% and blah, 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 blah. Socialism, and the other side is going to scream the same thing about socialism. What I think right now is the battleground argument should be this. As a nation, do we advocate for equality of opportunity or equality in outcome? Because equality in outcome gets you a $15 an hour minimum wage, right? Equality
I think it's far worse than just a $15 minimum wage.
No, but I'm saying that's the on-ramp, so to speak, to this behavior.
That's the
equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity allows people to be whomever they are to the fullest extent of their capabilities.
Well, right, and this is why we've talked about it, and I've talked about it with Jason as well. I believe that the missing piece to this, which is equal access,
right.
If you have afford equal opportunity and then equal access, you still not afforded equal outcome, but you have a higher probability that you will have led a better life than your parents, and then that cycle is a much more positive cycle than it is right now, where basically it's a coin flip. If you live in poverty today in the United States, it's almost a coin flip that your kids will also live in poverty, and that is, to me, dreadful.
I mean, the expectation. Here's the thing, and I'll say it like this: the expectation that your children are going to have better than you had, right? By whatever means, as an adult, you're trying to affect that. I think certainly after World War II, that largely became a reality for a big segment of the population, right? It did not become a reality for people of color, right? And so you start to see this big divide and big delta, right? And the programs that worked well and have actionable outcomes that we can say, let's do more of that. And I think like the affirmative action programs for admits into college, right? Affirmative admits have a higher propensity to go get graduate degrees, to go work in government, to go, to provide great outcome, right? We don't talk about that, right? When you get it on thing, we want to get into people's feelings, and they want to talk about a legacy of hate, right? And a legacy of wrong. And I'm not saying that we should ever ignore that, right? I think that's one of the reasons, like by taking down statues of Confederates and people that we look at and go, well, how did we get that thing erected in the first place? You can keep those up there and turn that into a positive thing, right?
What do you think about the renaming of the military bases that are named after Confederates?
You know why that happened, right? Like when they started doing that, why that happened to begin with, right? It was after the war. We let all the Confederate officers keep their guns, and we let everybody return back home with their guns. And we started to try to say, if we're going to save the Union, we have to do this. And so kind of as a, as a concession to try to mend the country and put it back together, and to give Confederates some dignity. And we can argue whether they deserve it or not, but you're living in 2021. You're not living in 1869. Right, 1870, 1875, and making decisions that moved at the speed of a horse. Right, that's when you think about it. Information had to be moved at the speed of a horse, maybe a train by then, right? But largely, we weren't telegraph. Right, we weren't moving at the speed that we move now, right? And I think in some ways, part of the problem we have in the U.S. today is everything has to be instantaneous, right? There's no time for deliberate thought, right? And that has outcomes that, no matter what side of the political coin you're on, I think are dangerous. And so they named all these bases in the South after usually Confederate generals, right? And they did it as a way to try to placate and be conciliatory and get people back into the Union. Well, I look at it and I think it was like, why are you naming them after people that lost? Right?
Same.
You know what I mean? Like we're naming it. And so have we moved to a time where we're not going to, where that needs to happen, I guess, or leave it that way and have it. And this is the other thing is it hurts your feelings, right? Really, because that's what it is. It hurts your feelings. It hurts somebody's feelings to have this base named after a Confederate general. Well, let's have an honest discussion about why we named it that way, right? What we were trying to do, who that person was as a man, good or bad, right? And then move forward from there.
Right? 'Cause it's interesting as you say, with that, because I look at it as not only did they lose, but most of them weren't very good.
Right. Hence the reason they lost, right?
But like, you can take, General Lee was largely considered a good person, prior to the war. He didn't want to do it at all. And he's literally said, if Virginia enters, then my love for Virginia will force me to do this. And was considered a great military mind.
Right.
And, probably also why we basically made sure he could never do what he ever did again. He was, I think, if my memory serves correctly, we treated him a little bit differently than some of the other Confederate soldiers that we told to go home.
Yes.
I mean, we stripped him of everything.
Right.
He was that great of a military mind.
You look where Jefferson Davis, how long he was imprisoned at Fort Monroe, afterwards. And, everybody has, every great nation has an original sin. The UK's is colonization. And ours is how we dealt with, bringing humans, transacting humans. Right. I say that very specifically because that's what you were doing. You were transacting humans. Right. And yes, it's worse than it sounds. Right. And I tell people, down in Charleston, there's a building on the water or near the water that we took the kids down there for vacation years ago. And we drove, you can drive up one of the streets and you can see it at the end of the road. And I go, put yourself there and imagine, true Africans in bondage on that big platform being sold without regard to what family they were from and anything else. And treating them like animals, right? You treated them like cattle, right? You sell a cow, you don't care whose mom the cow is, right? That's it. And so you treat them as a commodity, right? That's the discussion. Don't remove edifices that allow and foster people to be uncomfortable for that discussion, right? Put more of them up, right? It's like I say, get the Klan out there talking every day. Why? Because I want to hear what they have to say so that everybody on the planet can go, we got to get rid of that. Yeah. Right? And when you get, kind of get back to our starting point, when we get to a point where we're telling people to go to organized platforms that are closed loop, so to speak, right? What are you doing? Why are we hiding abhorrent behavior? Well, because it hurts your feelings, right? Why are you hiding things you disagree with? Get those into the public eye. If you don't want slavery to happen again, right, of any kind, right, and then get out there and let's continue to have an honest discussion about what was going on, and then talk about after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, all the steps that were put in place to effectively continue that behavior until late into the 20th century, right? And how that happens, right? Somebody right now, and if I had my soapbox, I'd be up on it. Somebody right now has to tell me how in God's name Eric Bieniemy is not going to be a head coach in the NFL next year, right? And trust me, I know the answer, right? I know the answer, right? And it's not good. right? I mean, and it's like, it's like when it quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, and smells like a duck. The thing. So what is it, right? You got Matt Nagy, you've got that jackass they just fired in with the Jets, and retreading all these coaches. You're taking a former NFL player who's a great offensive mind, who's a great builder of men and leaders by everybody's account. And you're telling me there's not one of 32 jobs for that guy? You're killing me. Right? And I get it. Right? And then you don't have to like it to understand it. Right? But when we take, whether it's a situation like that or any other situation where you're saying, hey, we provided equal opportunity, right? And there should be a certain outcome here based on past performance, right? If you remove the person, you say this job title with this experience and this winning record goes and gets an opportunity to be a head coach, right? Period. And you remove everything but this offensive coordinator or this defensive coordinator. If you do this as an offensive or defensive coordinator, how do we move forward, right? And here's the experience. Here's the line we have. And we've told people of every stripe that if you do these things in life, right? And football is easy because everybody sees it and the thing. You start as a position coach, then you move up, you an assistant position coach, then you get a backfield, then you get all the linebackers. You're not the inside linebackers coach or the linebackers coach. Then you become a coordinator. If you excel all the way along the way, you're going to get your shot to be, if you so choose, right? Because there's guys that are like, hey, I'm happy just running the defense, or I'm happy just running the offense. And hey, you can make a couple $1 million a year doing that. And it's a great way to make a living, right? If that's your passion, right? If that's what gives you energy, all right? Well, if you want to be a head coach, or you want to be X, or you want to be Y, like for most places, there's a pathway to success. Where does it come off the cart and why? And those are the honest discussions we have to have, right? And you can't legislate common sense or morality, right? And until people open their minds and hearts and all those other things, then think, do I think we're having common sense, discussions about that? No, right? We've gone to a point where everything has to have great virility to it. And is it gonna solve the problem? Probably not, right? But do we have to stuff it in a corner and say no? Absolutely not. Keep it at the forefront every day and ask questions, right? Why? Right? What's your why, right? And great leaders are consistently challenging paradigms, right? And if we're not going to do that in anything, whether it's government, humanity, how we do things, like if we're done challenging those paradigms, and I think using history as a way to challenge a paradigm, we're like, hey, look, you want to go do this? We've already tried it. It didn't work, right? It's not going to work again. Right? No, we're not any smarter. We're not any more forward thinking. We're not any more open. Right? This doesn't require that. It requires some deliberate thought. Right?
It does. And think about, this is the part where the coast biases, they go, fly over America. Well,
right.
Where do you think if you want manufacturing to come back, where do you think they're going to go? There's no probable way you can get a manufacturing plant in New York City.
No.
Where do you think that our food production is going to have to come from?
Right.
It's not going to be in those concrete jungles that are made on the coast. So you better start, making sure and this is why the Electoral College is important, because those voices in the Midwest now become extremely, extremely important, because if you, so to speak, want to bring manufacturing back to the United States, that's where it has to go, because they've got open land.
Right. Yeah. They're not making any more land.
Okay. If you want farmland, because you want to now no longer import, particular types of foods from other countries, you need land. If you want to do it in a ethical and morally responsible way, to where it's not being, so to speak, fish farms, cow farms, like, the highly big business where they're basically treated
industrial agri.
Right.
Right.
You need land. The Midwest becomes an important partner in that happening. Don't discount their voices, because then guess what? They're going to be like, nope, I'm in Idaho or Oklahoma, and I'm not going to sell to someone in California.
Right. And we're at that place now, right? I mean, people are like, you know.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I was talking to somebody that is from Austin, Texas, and they are they're conservative in their political views, and you know, all the folks that are moving from California and other places to create like a new technology hub that's Austin, which I think is great. I mean, UT system is a great education system and all that stuff. I mean, that's
I mean, it's not Michigan, but it's respectable.
But you know, and you always hear this is like, well, they're going to move there and then they're going to want to vote like they voted where they came from, right? And his thing was like, hey, good. They're bringing a lot of money to the state. Governor Perry, when he was the governor, now Governor Abbott, are doing a tremendous outreach to all of these states with abhorrent tax levels and a really bad regulatory environment for business. And they're doing a great job of selling people on the idea that Texas is the place to grow your business. And there's a group discussion, and one of the other guys was like, well, what happens when all of a sudden that Texas starts to turn blue? And he's like, and it goes back to your argument, you know, Texas is a microcosm of the nation. You have very industrialized areas in Houston, now Austin becoming, you know, tech hub, Dallas, and then you've got a lot of farmland. You've got cattle ranches. You've got, you know, all of those things that are out there, and they're this little mini. He goes, I'll give up the congressional seat in Austin to get that employment base, right? To get that. And I read not so long ago that even I think it was like the NASDAQ is looking at wanting to move out of New York. I mean, think about that, right? But think about that, whether it happens or not. But could you imagine in your lifetime 20 years ago where that discussion that what you're saying is we no longer want New York to be the financial hub of the country and the world, right?
No, and I'm glad that it is. Mainly because, you know, I'm not really a big fan of the politics of New York.
Right. But that's what I'm saying is like, you know, in your lifetime early on, could you imagine a place where, hey, number one, we want to like hedge fund guys are leaving the state like it's the national pastime. They're leaving New York and New Jersey like it's national pastime and going to Florida and other tax friendly states. And that one of the biggest symbols of capitalism is thinking about moving out of New York.
Well, but and this is the thing, you know, and we'll close it on this. That's the reason why the terrorists went into the World Trade Towers, because they wanted to take down the financial capital of the world, and that was the symbol of the financial capital of the world.
Right. And that's, but like I said, like think about like in the last 20 years, how much, like what paradigms have broken.
Yeah. Right.
And I think when you to kind of finish, when you get people yelling and screaming that we got to stop this and we got to stop that, how the lens of history doesn't have to be that long to go in 20 years, you know, what, you know, we're this September 11th is gonna be the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Right. And in that last 20 years, where has the world shifted? And if we can do that in 20 years, right, good or bad, like however you look at it, we can do that. We can make systemic changes the way that we've made in the last 20 years. What can we do in the next 20 years? Right. And that is, if you want to be out there and be hopeful and grow, it's like, hey, what positive changes can we make as a society in the next 20 years that move away from that? Right. And you pick the marker in time you want. Like 9/11 is easy because it was a big historical event. But I mean, you've got guys, and when I say guys, I mean, you've got people like the sons and daughters of people that were alive and fighting shortly after 9/11 in the war. The kids are now doing it.
Yep.
Right. Like anybody like think that's a sane statement. Right. And I mean, and that's, you know, I can't like, I stopped processing that. Right. It makes me sad. Like that we've not figured out a better, like we're just going to, we can't, you know, we can't figure it out completely. So we're just going to keep throwing bodies over there until somebody says uncle. Well, guess what? The Afghans are not saying uncle because they're in the first inning for them historically, you know, and I still can't believe we as a nation haven't lost interest. Right. I mean, in spending that kind of money. I mean, and the human capital that, you know, that we've given up as a nation, right? That's the thing. It's like, what do we do the last 20 years in life? What can you do in the next 20?
That's right.
And focus on that as opposed to focusing on what happened last week and telling everybody they were wrong for doing what they're doing. Okay, if you think we're wrong, tell us what we're doing right, and then let's have a discussion and let's vote on it.
Yep,
right?
I agree. And I think that's a good lesson. What are we going to do to improve our nation in the next 20 years? We could see what's one generation essentially.
Right. And there's, how do we challenge young people? When I say young people, I mean, people get out of school and they enter the workforce, and wherever they do it. And while they're in school, giving them the tools to have the imagination to want to change the world. Right. I mean, you look at the big players, right? You look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk is like, hey, I think we should do this. He put his money where his mouth is, and he says, I'm betting on this. And he went over 500,000 cars made last year, right? And I believe I'm a big believer in the space program.
And 25% of them are recalled.
Well, regardless, right? I mean, but what does it take to have an innovative, to be that paradigm breaker and everything? You're going to do that.
To utilize his wealth to continue to expand the imaginations of, right. And I think, and while as much as I'm not a fan of Elon Musk, I do think just because I'm not a fan doesn't mean there aren't commendable things of that individual, and there are plenty of positive things about Elon Musk. I don't want to. I don't want him to be a good leader because of the way in which he treats his employees, and that's.
But look at the second order effect. There you're taking former employees of his company that have worked for him, worked hard, learned, achieved success while they were there, got burnt out or got anything, and they're outgoing, starting companies now to either challenge or augment pieces of the pie that he wants to grow. And he's developed a very level tone about what it's going to take to get everybody on EV vehicles, right? And he's like, hey, first off, we've got to get to the point where storage allows a 500-mile round trip, right? Because think about when I was driving from the beach to DC every week to go to work at Stalin Circle, the round trip on that was like 360 miles, 180 miles each way. And my big problem would be when I'm up there at the time, even if I had a Tesla, for example, or any EV, where were the charging stations in National Harbor? There were none, right? So I would have to park my car for the week and then be on the thing, hey, I can make it all the way home, right? So being reliable at 500 miles, I think, is an exceptional goal. Then that takes the storage issue. And how much money is he investing in batteries, in technology to make batteries less abusive to the planet and have more storage capacity?
Well, I'm not sure he's doing things about the aspect of the planet, because in order to be able to make a battery, you got
to scrape for lithium,
right? So why is he not betting on hydrogen? Where Toyota is doing that, Honda's doing that,
right?
That you're not taking the same environmental impact, but no one wants to. In the most part, people don't want to talk about.
Well, it's like wind turbines. Like wind turbines have to use petroleum lubricants to function, right? And they break and they leak just like every other. They catch on fire. They do everything else. And the other big impact of wind is those big ass blades kill a lot of birds inadvertently, right? And so this is another thing. We get off on the thing, but when you talk about people that want to expand humanity in a way, like, and again, is it going to be perfect? Nope. But here's the thing. If you say hydrogen, right? Or even if you said natural gas in the short term, like everybody wants to go from zero to fully clean. Like there's steps along the way that, hey, natural gas is 1.5 times cleaner than X, and this is 1.5 times cleaner. And so you're on this, you're taking steps that are both environmentally responsible and they're fiscally responsible, right? This crowd that says the planet's going to end in 13 years, I'll tell you, how I know it's not? Because if it were, and let's just take it as sea level rise, right? If the sea level was going to rise, let's say 10 feet, right? That's a big number that's thrown out. Sea level is going to rise 10 feet. Well, there's no more Florida. My house is Atlantis, and within 100 miles or so of most of the coast, that doesn't exist anymore, right? And so we're now, and you talk about usable farmland, those become cities because the whole East Coast is done, right? If that was the case, I would not be able to insure my home.
100% true.
Right? There'd be like nobody under
for-profit companies, and like
nobody's underwriting a mortgage for a 30-year or a 15-year asset that's going to disappear in 13 years with no hope of ever coming back. Right? They're not doing it. Right? And so how do we do this responsibly? Right? You can have people like Elon Musk and others they're shooting literally for the solar system and other planets, right? That you want to get people's imagination going that way so that you have long-term goals. But you want to have people that have an engineering mindset and a mindset of accomplishment and projects and everything that say, hey, let's do it this way. We won't trash the economy, and we're going to be more helpful to the environment every day of the week, right? And the other big thing right now is how do we get, like, if you're using hydrogen, just like we have gas stations now where we pump petroleum into cars, you can pull up and there's going to be a hose there. And so the transition to me seems relatively easy, right? The transition to battery powered cars as a long haul, like going from here to California, right? The other reason he says he wants 500 miles is that's about the limit of what people drive in a day. Right. So people, they'll drive for 8 hours and they'll get off the road. And he's like, now it's a function of how many charging stations can we have and where. And the charging stations are going to have to be as eponymous as yellow lines in parking lots. They can't just be, hey, we got to go here, we got to go there. Right. I mean, I pulled into a Wawa in Richmond not so long ago, and they have like 10 charging stations. Like one of the outer curbs, you still have where all the pumps are. And then along the way, they have tables set up there and everything. And people are in there. It's a genius idea. People are there charging their cars and they'll get something to eat. And then they're on their way in like 30 minutes. They get a charge and they do everything. It has to be, how do you do that? Right. But it all starts with saying, hey, what do we consider to be a full day's drive when you're on the road? So that when people get there, they go eat and they go to sleep, they get recharged. But and here's the thing, even if that doesn't work out perfectly, what unknown things about advancement in science and humanity are we going to find out that are going to lead to the next great thing that we can't imagine today? That's what gets me excited about science and exploration, which is really what, Elon Musk and Bezos and others with all these projects to go to different planets is in the early 70s with effectively analog or less technology that's in my smartwatch, we went to the moon. And then all of a sudden we can't do that anymore.
Well, TK, according to critical race theory, your belief in science means you're a racist.
Perfect. Hold on, let me get a pen. I got to write that down. Today I'm a racist. Perfect. Yikes. But that's the thing that's the wonderment, right? And where is that wonderment in society, right? It's in very compartmentalized groups. Like people on like great debates today aren't how are we, it's the Star Trek theory, right? Like, at some point we're going to come from Earth. And whether you were formerly a Russian or formerly an American is immaterial because we've changed what statehood looks like when you have, if you imagine it, if you had interstellar travel, what planet you're on is like, hey, I live in Virginia right now, right? And what's the imagination what's the event, whether it's in school or with your parents or anything, that wakes a child up that says, I've got to change the world, all right? And the more as a society we say we've got to worry about food and shelter, the less imagination you're going to have. Yep. So how do we say, hey, we want to remove we want everybody to be in that pyramid, but not at the bottom of the pyramid. We want you to start from a certain level playing field where there's equal opportunity to express your greatness. And some of those young folks are going to express their greatness in things that are going to change humanity. And some of it's just going to make us easier for us to get on the internet and go watch cat videos. But everybody's expressing their greatness in a way that befits them, right? And so that's really when we start talking about how we spend money on technology and advancing it, why I think it's important to explore space because of the side benefits that we're in. And you look at guys like Chamath, I can't remember his last name, but he's a big investor. And he was one of the early Facebook billionaires and things like that. And he's like, I invest in space because of all the side benefits that in technology and everything that we're going to get. And if I'm investing in companies that are exploring the planets, then I'll be in a position to invest in the other companies because I'll understand which technology is really kicking ass and growing and which is not.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, my friend, got to run.
Get after it. Have a great day.
I got some donuts to make, so to speak.
I'm gonna go get my gym on.
All right. Have a great week. Take care, everyone.
Well.